Untangle Your Anxiety, Chapter 3. Why do we get the anxious response? Featured illustrator at Self-Care Visuals. The amygdala. Have you ever stepped into the road and noticed at the last second a car was driving straight towards you, so you instantly jolted back to the curb? Perhaps your heart felt like it was in your stomach. Your breathing intensified and you could feel your heart racing. This is the anxious response. It was anxiety that saved you from getting hit by that car. Anxiety is crucial for our survival. It is our body's natural response, a fear system built within us to keep us safe. Without it, we wouldn't have evolved to where we are now. Our ancestors would have been attacked and killed in the wild if we didn't have this inbuilt protection system. We need to be constantly on alert, hyper-vigilant, and in a state of anticipation to apprehend potential predators such as lions, saber-toothed tigers, snakes, and people trying to sell you life insurance. It is paramount that we understand the role of the anxious response when it comes to eradicating excessive anxiety. When learning about anxiety and overcoming it, we always start with the oldest part of our brain, our lizard brain. Within the lizard brain, there are a part called the amygdala. It is this part, the amygdala, where we always begin. Josh, have you ever experienced the sensation of falling when you're about to drift off to sleep, where you're in kind of half asleep, half awake state, and you visualize and feel like you're tripping over or falling over a pavement? If you have, you'll know that you jolt yourself awake immediately and feel a bit shocked, much like the car in the road analogy. This is the amygdala at work. The amygdala is the oldest and fastest part of your brain, but it isn't the smartest. Its primary job is to look out for danger by constantly scanning things using our senses. We all have an amygdala. It is built and it is absolutely vital for survival. If you have had a friend or family member who has frightened you as a joke, saying boo, for example, then you'll notice you'll feel shocked, then on edge, and it takes a few moments to calm down. The amygdala reacted before you could, engaging a defensive response just in case there was danger. Once you and the amygdala determined that there was no danger, you calmed down again. The same applies when watching a scary movie in a horror film, or if you suddenly have a slam on the brakes in a car. This is the common function of the amygdala. It turns off and on in response to perceived danger, and it does it very quietly. Ultimately, the amygdala is a conductor of fear response. It is the on switch, the boss, the CEO of Fear Inc., and it can be annoying as hell when things come disordered. After all, most people reading this book will often be experiencing an anxious response that triggers in response to little or no danger. This is really important to understand what happens when the amygdala decides there is danger and what it does to change our bodies in response to said danger. It is the process that helps many people understand the motive themselves to overcome excessive and disordered anxiety. Remember, the amygdala triggers the fear response when it perceives danger. Whether or not there is actual danger does not matter. If the amygdala perceives there is danger, then it will activate. If the amygdala decides there is danger, it communicates very quickly with the part of your brain called hypothalamus. It is the part of our brain that triggers the sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for releasing adrenaline and making us feel fear, on edge, and panic. The amygdala says the hypothalamus, hey, I think we're in danger here, so give us a load of adrenaline. Anxious people can notice this when they feel a whoosh feeling or that feeling like there's a pit in our stomach or butterflies. As many people describe it, this is basically anxiety. But why do we experience it when we don't want to? Why do we experience it in the absence of our perceivable danger? Let's look at the anxious response a bit more. We experience the world through our thoughts and senses. A sensory information from our vision, sound, taste, and touch is sent to the most motherboard of our brains, the thalamus. This is like the main operation center of our brains, and this is where anxiety starts. I like to think of the thalamus as the main call center, or telephone switchboard of the brain, where messages and calls are directed and redirected to an appropriate place of the brain. A bit like operator, which service do you require? Josh. The thalamus then sends this sensory information on to the neocortex, which is our thinking brain. It is when information is sent to our thinking brain that we decide whether or not this sensory stimulus is dangerous or not. From here, a message is sent to the amygdala, which then produces an appropriate emotional response such as fear, terror, upset, or anger. If our thinking brain deems the situation dangerous, then it tells the amygdala to signal the hypothalamus to release adrenaline and trigger a sympathetic nervous system. For example, you're walking down the street when you see a dog coming towards you. From far away, the dog looks harmless, but it still has your attention. Our visual sense is telling us that the thalamus was what it is seeing, and because we like dogs, we become excited or happy to see the dog. To us, this is the appropriate response to have because we like dogs, in this example, anyways. However, as we get closer, we notice that the dog is showing its teeth and it is foaming at the mouth. Its eyes are red, and we realize it is walking erratically. We also notice that it is growling. This dog could be potentially rabid and dangerous. Our visual and auditory senses now take this new information and present it to the thalamus, which then relays the information to the amygdala. The amygdala would now deem that this dog is no longer something to be happy about, but something to be afraid of. The amygdala then signals the hypothalamus to release adrenaline. When then experience fear and are flooded with catastrophic thoughts about the dog biting us, which in turn makes us avoid the dog, perhaps by crossing over the road or turning around and walking away. This is the fight or flight response at work. However, and this bit is important, if we are faced with an imminent danger, then the thalamus will send sensory information directly to the amygdala just in case we need to fight, run, or freeze. This occurred when you tried to cross the road, but there was a car speeding towards you. This quick-fire message from the thalamus directly to the amygdala occurred when your friend startled you or you had a falling dream as you tried to drift off to sleep. Using our dog analogy, this occurs when the dog suddenly jumps out the bushes and dives towards you, catching you unaware. The signal from the thalamus directly to the amygdala is a rapid response, and it has to be. It is this response that saved your life and can save your life again. However, it can be an annoyance and uncomfortable when it triggers unnecessarily. Scientists, until only recently, used to believe that the amygdala alone was the central part that served fear and anxiety. Previous studies have shown that monkeys with a damaged amygdala were fearless in the face of danger. In people with anxiety disorder, scientists were under the assumption that increased and disruptive anxiety and fear were caused by a hyperactive amygdala. However, today, scientists know that it is not solely the amygdala that is at play and that it is the fear network, a constant chatter between different regions within the brain. By splitting the brain into two sections, a cognitive brain and the emotional brain, we can better understand this. The frontal part of the brain where our thoughts are processed and our sensations experience is the cognitive brain. The amygdala is located deep in the brain and is part of the emotional brain. It is believed we only fear anxiety when signals from our emotional brain overpower the cognitive brain and flow into our conscience. To use an example, imagine that you were anxious and floating in deep sea water. We know that attacks by sea creatures whisked in the sea are rare, but for some people, treading water and feeling anxious can trigger a multitude of fears, the emotional brain. However, let's say we're treading water next to a boat for safety. Then the cognitive brain network can overtake the emotional network and dampen the fear response. In summary, the anxious response can override current thinking and logic. It can bypass asking the neocortex for analysts to see if the situation can be dangerous or not and just release an anxious response anyways. This is what happens when people have their first panic attack. This is why panic or intense anxiety seemingly comes from nowhere. You must remember that anxiety can occur even out of our control. What's positive, though, is that we can control what we do in response to it in order to turn it off. Adrenaline and cortisol. Really super important this. The reason why we feel so scared when we are anxious is because of hormones, primarily the powerful chemicals of adrenaline, epinephrine, and cortisol. If you have ever felt that whoosh feeling of fear, then this is adrenaline being released and coursing around your bloodstream. If you are someone with constantly feels on edge, then this is mostly likely a combination of adrenaline, lower levels, and cortisol. Adrenaline is such a powerful hormone, and the amount of adrenaline we feel is often related to how much we worry or panic. Lots of adrenaline can make our heart rate increase. It can make us feel incredibly tense and can trigger nausea and also act as a trigger for our mind to race. It can also make us feel really spaced out and at times contributes to a feeling of derealization. This is where we feel detached from our bodies or experience a sense of unreality. For people with an anxiety disorder, it can also make us feel incredibly confused. A lot of people develop panic disorder when they suddenly experience a rush of fear for no reason. This is usually called a panic attack because the confusion surrounding the sudden rush of adrenaline makes us worry about it more. Our focus can suddenly go inwards and we can begin to monitor ourselves for the signs of imminent disaster, such as experiencing a heart attack, losing our minds, freaking out, collapsing, just to name a few. Josh. When it comes to understanding our own anxiety, it is better to be important to acknowledge the profound effect adrenaline and cortisol can have on our minds and bodies. Hormones are the general part of fight, flight, or freeze response and massively contribute to the following: a change in thoughts, racing thoughts, finding dangers, overthinking and overanalyzing, and believing the worst case scenario of a situation. A change in feelings of fear, dread, doom, and negative anticipation, feeling like something awful is going to happen. Physical change: heart palpitation, derealization, irritable bowel syndrome, chest pains, muscle tension all over body, headaches, muscle twitches, dizziness, nausea, and many more. We like to make anxiety as simple as possible when we work with people. Remember, fear and anxiety mean you have adrenaline and cortisol in your bloodstream. This feeling is chemical and importantly internal. It does not mean the disaster or the worry you have been dwelling on will come true. The nervous system. Another really important component of anxiety that we must understand is the role of our nervous system. When it comes to anxiety in particular, the role of the autonomic nervous system. Our nervous system is responsible for both voluntary movement, the voluntary system, but also the internal process of the body, which lie mostly out of our control, the autonomic system. When working with anxiety, we always focus on the autonomic. This is what we will refer to as the nervous system from now on. For simplicity purpose, our nervous system is split into two parts. Sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for triggering our body's fight, flight, or freeze response. It is responsible for triggering the adrenaline glands. Hello again, adrenaline. And also responsible for altering the function of our vital organs. Anxiety aside, our sympathetic nervous system is engaged every time we are in performance mode, or perhaps under pressure at work, or enduring prolonged stress due to life circumstances. It helps us to perform under stress by providing the necessary bodily changes to accommodate our needs. These are the nerves and that the famous Dr. Claire Weeks suggested get very tired. We suggested that excessive anxiety and worry occur when our nerves get exhausted, something that we agree with. Ultimately, when stress gets too much, this puts us in a susceptible position to experience anxiety and a misfiring amygdala, trying to think of the sympathetic nervous system as the part that gets us through stuff. The parasympathetic system. The parasympathetic system is a restorative part of our nervous system that is activated when you are resting, eating, enjoying something, experiencing relief, or sleeping. This is the part of our nervous system that activities when we lie down after a long day, put the television on or the radio, and switch off the day. The key information here being that it is activated when we are at rest. The parasympathetic nervous system acts as a restorative part of our body that helps us to regenerate, process food, helps us to sleep, and give rest to our body's vital organs. People who are stressed for a long period of time rely on the sympathetic nervous system to get them through the day. However, they really need to find time to activate the parasympathetic system in order to find balance. Ultimately, if we don't have balance, this can lead to excessive anxiety. The role of stress in disordered anxiety. When working in this practice or when giving talks to organizations, Josh often draws upon the analogy of a stress jug, which is a metaphor for our ability to cope with and absorb stress. He explains that when we experience stress in any form, it gets poured into our jug. This includes everyday stress such as finances, our career, parenting, being a carer, chronic illness, etc. However, it also includes long-term unprocessed stress such as grief, an unhappy relationship, trauma, and emotional turbulence from our past. Our stress jug can handle a lot of stress, hence why the people around us are not continually having panic attacks. We simply do not get sucked into an anxious hole that embozzles us every time we deal with something stressful. However, when stress builds up and the sympathetic nervous system gets overused, our stress jug can become overwhelmingly full. When any receptacle is full, we run the risk of it spilling out or overflowing, and it is at this point we experience excessive anxiety, which can easily develop into an anxiety disorder. In summary, when our stress jug overflows, we experience excessive anxiety, which includes panic attacks. People often tell me that their acute anxiety seems to occur from nowhere. This is something I used to believe, but actually acute anxiety, which is that flood of adrenaline, along with racing thoughts, feelings, and strange symptoms, occur because our body simply doesn't want to take on more stress. It's like a warning signal for us to stop. People with disordered anxiety, however, do not stop. They get caught in loops. Josh. Here's where understanding the amygdala, our lizard brain, is important. When we get overstressed or overworked, the amygdala gets tricked into thinking we're in actual danger. Remember, the amygdala does not take chances and activities to save us, just in case our life is at risk. Now, remember how you felt when someone startled you or you jolted awake when you dreamt of falling? Well, the amygdala interprets stress, our stress jug overflowing as danger in itself. This is why we get that rush of adrenaline and cortisol and feel like something awful is about to happen. Let us repeat that. The amygdala interrupts stress, and our stress jug overflowing as danger in itself. This is where excessive and disordered anxiety comes from. Our stress builds up either over time or as a response to trauma, and this fills up the stress jug. We overuse our sympathetic nervous system, and the amygdala get tricked into thinking we're in danger. As a result, it releases a lot of fear hormones such as adrenaline, which make us feel often the intense fear or feeling on edge, or the racing thoughts of the palpitations, nausea, trembling, etc. When we get confused by this or don't understand what is going on, we can develop a fear of the sensations and worry about what they mean. We can also get sucked into the what-if thoughts that occur as a result of these sudden changes. We can misinterpret symptoms and become frightened. Fear not, though, as this is actually a healthy, normal biological response. In conversation. Josh. I don't know about you, Dean, but learning about the amygdala for me and the psychoeducation about anxiety in general was so helpful for me to overcome anxiety, and I use it every day when I work with clients. Because if you don't know what's going on, it's very hard to overcome it. But when you know what's going on and you feel like actually I'm going to go insane, this is all quite normal. I found that very empowering. I don't know about you. Dean. I really did, and I've got a small story about it. When I first went to the doctors, and all I wanted was all these answers of why am I feeling the way I am, and what is it. They ran tests. She told me it was anxiety, and she prescribed me with a library card for a book. Now you can imagine an anxious 20-year-old lad being prescribed a library book when he thought that obviously something was seriously wrong. I really thought it was like a misjustice. Being like I didn't have a clue why she'd done it. So anyway, I went to the library. I got these books about the biology of anxiety and what is happening to me. Looking back on it, it was one of the most useful tools that anyone ever could have. And that's learning about what you say regarding on psychoeducation, behind the anxious response and anxious symptoms, and just the reason that the body responds like it does when it is in an anxious state. Josh. Yes, oh wow, there's not actually much wrong with me. This is actually a natural phenomenon. This is really helpful. If my doctor would have told me that straight away, and I don't want to be bad-mouth my doctor too much because he needs to know a little bit about a lot, but if my doctor or someone, or my mental health nurse, would have just told me a lot of this straight away, it would have saved me a lot of bother and saved me a lot of time and energy. Dean. I agree with you. However, the anxious brain, do you not think that you would have automatically wanted to disregard it and thought no, because a lot of people, when they get told it's just anxiety, it's hard to accept it because the anxious response is telling you no. What if it isn't just anxiety? What if it's anxiety and this new problem? Josh. Today. That is true, and probably my anxious brain would have done. I know in rare cases some doctors are clued up about anxiety and they don't just hastily dismiss and throw medication at people. They'll sit and go. Today, you know what anxiety is. You know how it presents, and just basically what we said, the 3 components of anxiety, in a sense that you know you get these what ifs. You feel on edge. You get all these symptoms because I had no idea. No one told me. I thought the word anxiety just meant you're nervous about something, like being nervous about an exam, for example. So if someone actually told me what it meant, I think it would have saved me a lot of bother, and I hear this a lot from a lot of my clients. When you make them feel reassured, normal, like there's nothing wrong with them, they're not broken. You don't need to fix them. It does a lot of work. It's like, oh, I don't need to keep responding to this anxiety like I'm broken. Dean. I completely agree with you. I can only stress obviously a natural response of anxiety has been helping humanity since the dawn of time. Without it, we wouldn't have been able to evolve as a species. However, today we just don't have the threat we did when we were out hunting and coming across things that could really probably eat us alive. So Josh, I don't know, you grew up in Oldham. Dean laughs. Didn't you? Dean. Yeah, Rockdale. Josh. Rockdale. Oh, yes. I don't know if that's better or worse. Dean. Yes, I think it's, lineal after. However, no. The problem is, well, it's not a problem, but the response system reacts to a perceived threat actually the same it would as a real threat. So when we're in the office and we get what if, or we zone in on a feeling that we've got that feels uncomfortable, that perceived threat is going to give the exact same anxious response as if we were in the wild and we were against a tiger staring down at us.